Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mighty Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Stars of Chaos Volume 5, also known as Chapeau Lang, and we're covering chapters 118 through 120, so I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 118, Old Foe. Great Liang spent the entirety of the 9th year of Longan shrouded in the scent of gunpowder. At the end of the 5th month, Prince Yan, acting as the representative of the court, met with the 13 virtuous merchants who had made the first batch of war beacon tickets a success to declare their expiration. At the same time, he announced the establishment of the Longan Bank, personally approved by Li Feng. This institution would be headquartered in the capital and its branches established across the nation to handle the collection and cashing out of expired war beacon tickets. Local officials would shoulder these responsibilities in the interim. The next day, the newly minted Longan Bank announced several options for cashing out war beacon tickets. Holders could exchange the tickets for silver on the spot, or they could open an account at the Longan Bank. There they could exchange the value of their ticket for the same value in silver deposited at the bank and instead take home Longan banknotes, which would be put into immediate use throughout the nation. They could even exchange the notes for shares in the government-owned factories operated by the Canal Commission. The prices of these shares were clearly paid out in a thick booklet. Fang Qin and his allies ground their teeth at the sight. Prince Yan had obviously planned this long in advance. Banks were nothing new to Great Liang. There were private banks run by civilians and official ones the government used to process payments for international trade. The Longan Bank had absorbed many of these government-run banks upon its establishment, some of them by force. Prince Yan had abandoned his former gentle and elegant image. Ever since his return to the court, it was as if he had been possessed, growing madder by the day. The imperial merchants who ran these government banks, despite their title, were backed mostly by influential noble families and not the throne. They tended to remember the imperial part only when they wanted to throw their weight around and saw themselves as mere merchants when they sought to fill their pockets. They had no scruples about blurring the lines between public and private affairs, and their account books were equal parts mud and water. A full 3 days and nights wouldn't have been enough to untwist the thorny thicket of their entangled lines of profit. They were all accustomed to treating government business as their own personal enterprise. Who among them had imagined the skies would turn overnight and a certain prince would snatch the enterprises they had worked so hard to build out from under them? Every court assembly between the 5th and 8th month was as chaotic as a flock of chickens set loose in the market. The director of one of the government banks was first to stick his neck out and resist, only for someone else to immediately produce evidence of the director's fraud and embezzlement. He was consigned to the dungeons and his assets seized for investigation. His wife, weak of constitution in the first place, happened to be with child. After running around for days on end dealing with the fallout, she suffered a miscarriage that cost her both the baby and her life. The woman's mother had been granted a title by the late emperor. On her 70th birthday, the late emperor had personally written a plaque declaring her a star of longevity. Her daughter had arrived late in life, and she cherished the girl like nothing else. How could she bear this in silence? Brandishing the late emperor's plaque, she threatened to hang herself on the spot. Every duke and marquis in the capital wished they could drag Prince Yan out and flay him. Fang Qin cleverly directed the point of his spear not at the imperial scion, Prince Yan himself, but at the Grand Council. He organized members of his faction throughout the 6 ministries to submit a furious joint memorial containing 16 separate accusations against the Grand Council and an impassioned statement requesting the emperor disband what should have been a temporary wartime institution. The Grand Council wasn't helpless. It naturally fought back. In the blink of an eye, both sides had unearthed every dusty indiscretion they could find and tossed them onto center stage. the entire court bristling with blades, both visible and concealed, locked in a struggle to the death. Even those who weren't directly involved caught a few stray arrows as they tried to sneak along the sidelines. As mid-autumn approached, the conflict reached a white-hot blaze. Even a man as cautious as Jiang Chong found himself accused of one wrongdoing or another, and had been placed on leave from his position pending investigation. Everyone knew the emperor was quietly protecting Prince Yan despite the unbiased image he put on for the court. Otherwise, how could the prince have stayed so steady in the midst of this political storm? The chaos persisted until the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. Li Feng was attending the imperial family banquet in the inner palace, as was customary. On the way, he encountered the third prince. Even the strictest father would soften toward such a young child. Li Feng called the boy over with a rare gentleness and led him by the hand. The third prince feared his father no less than his elder brothers did, and dared not utter a single word even as he stretched his hand up and scurried forward to keep up with his father's long strides. Within a few steps, his little face was flushed with exertion. It was a palace attendant who reminded Li Feng on the boy's behalf. Only then did Li Feng look down and see the anxious look on his son's young face. For some reason, he was struck by the memory of Prince Yan sitting on the grass weaving straw insects for this child so very recently. "Summon Prince Yan to the palace for the family banquet," Li Feng said to the palace attendant. The attendant hastened off. But after running there and back again, he returned without the person he had gone to summon. "Your Majesty, this servant was unable to find His Highness Prince Yan." Li Feng frowned. "He wasn't in the office of the Grand Council?" "Minister Jiang has been wrapped up in some trouble, and there have been calls to disband the Grand Council," the attendant explained, selecting his words with care. "His Highness has placed his own work on hold, saying he ought to avoid suspicion. Isn't his official apology still on your desk?" Li Feng rubbed at the crease between his brows. He remembered now. "You didn't go to his home? The Prince Yan estate? Or the Marquis of Anding estate?" "I did," the attendant said quietly. "The servant said His Highness has quit the city and gone to the National Temple. He's staying with Great Master Liao Zhen." Li Feng was stunned. The night of the Mid-Autumn Festival was a time for families to reunite. Yet Prince Yan, the prince of the first rank and second in status only to the emperor himself, was sitting by his lonesome beneath an impoverished monk's dim lantern and an ancient Buddha. All as a gang of agitators tried every trick in the book to drag him down. The thought gnawed at Li Feng's heart. He had been moved by Changgeng's declaration of his intent to follow in the ways of the Lord of Shang. Yet the trouble Prince Yan caused with his extreme tactics also gave Li Feng a persistent headache. He had pursued the accusations against Jiang Chong as a warning to the prince about his conduct. But Prince Yan was still a member of the Li family. Even if he tended to go too far, everything he had done was to plug up the holes in the court. In the end, every meter of the land belonged, above all, to its ruler. The emperor hadn't spoken on the matter, yet these officials and nobles were champing at the bit to toss accusations around. Did they think themselves above the imperial family? Previously, although Li Feng knew Wang Guo had done wrong, he had protected the imperial uncle within the palace when the furious Tan Hongfei and the northern camp charged in to interrogate him. Li Feng was, by nature, amenable to coaxing, but not to coercion. He was willing to intervene to keep the powers within his court in balance. But it was another matter entirely when all the major noble families were joining forces to target Prince Yan. Certain people have taken this too far, Li Feng thought to himself. Yet before this seed could sprout within the emperor's heart, on that very evening, a crisis erupted far away across the nation. The far western navy, which had retreated to a harbor along the coast of the East Sea, had sent the Jiangbei garrison an insincere holiday present just the day before. Before the dew could dry on that incongruous gift of fresh flowers, they launched an attack, a premeditated full-scale assault on Great Liang's Liangjiang garrison. After Gu Yuan took command of Liangjiang, he had done his utmost to bring the patrol and defense of the local garrison up to the Black Iron Battalion's standard. While the court had been busy fighting fires in its own backyard, the Dragon, Hawk, and Light and Heavy Armor divisions in Jiangbei all stood at full combat readiness, despite their outward appearance of leisure. That night, the Western Watchtower, which had been keeping a close eye on enemy movements, was first to notice the shift in the Western Navy. They lit their alert lantern at once. Beams of white light speared through the pitch-black water of the Yangtze-like Parhelion arrows, and the dragonets of the vanguard glided into formation before they'd even heard the commander's order. Great iron booms rose in the water closer to shore. At the same time, a messenger in hawk armor flew straight from the watchtower to the commander's tent. On the western flagship, Mr. Jia burst into the Pope's cabin, chest heaving. "Your Holiness, they have been closely surveilling us. We've been discovered." "That is to be expected." The Pope didn't raise his eyes. "Last time, their commander had just passed away and they had yet to hand over the garrison. We launched a successful sneak attack then through a stroke of luck. Now that Gu Yuan has taken charge, we can no longer rely on good fortune. Go on now. They've discovered us already. Let's give our old foe a proper greeting." The words were scarcely out of his mouth before a messenger was rushing out to relay his orders. Mr. Jia frowned. "Your Holiness, I was thinking, is it really the right time? Why can't we wait a little longer? Great Liang is embroiled in a political power struggle much like the Holy Empire. If we wait, perhaps an opportunity will reveal itself." A great roar from outside interrupted him. The fast and agile ships of the Western Vanguard had opened fire. These opening volleys launched the battle into unstoppable motion. Explosions boomed from every direction. With a shudder, Mr. Jia realized he must turn his attention to the battlefield. He had suffered heavy losses at Gu Yuan's hand before. The Pope glanced away from the field scope and turned to Mr. Jia. "I had a premonition that this would be our best opportunity. Full speed ahead." The sea dragon slashed through the icy water with a roar like a great black shadow. After lying in wait, salivating for so long, it once again bared claws and fangs as it charged toward Great Liang's shores. Yet this time, Great Liang's navy was no longer the weakling it had been. In the Liangjiang garrison, a sentry stepped into the place of one of his fallen comrades. Sentries were the eyes and ears of the army, but it was this young man's first time serving in this capacity. When he heard the report of guns and cannons behind his back, he activated his hawk armor in a panic and launched into a violet-streaked dive. He hit the ground running and, carried by his momentum, sprinted some dozen steps until a light cavalryman on patrol near the commander's tent managed to grab hold of him. "Emergency military report. I need to speak to the marshal." The flustered sentry fell silent as the man propping him up patted him on the head. He looked down, startled, to find that the person whom he had mistaken for a soldier on guard duty was Gu Yuan in the flesh. "No need to fear. We've defeated them before." Gu Yuan gave the young sentry's shoulder a bracing squeeze and smiled. "Come, let's meet our adversary." Within the space of this exchange, every armored infantryman and light cavalryman had finished gearing up. Purple flames from the armored hawks sparked in the darkness of the night. At a long whistle from Gu Yuan, the aerial assassin surged, bloodthirsty, into the air. "Dragon warships and dragonets, formations of 3 and 5, move out. Hawks, mount Parhelion bows on the iron booms." What else was there? Gu Yuan slung his windslasher over his back like a fashion accessory and rubbed his chin and thought. "Oh, right. One more thing. Go fetch the dessert the Lingshu Institute sent us. When we're tired from all the fighting, we can give our foreign friends a little something extra to chew on." The attack from the far western army was sudden, but the Liangjiang garrison's response was that of a well-oiled machine. On one side was the Pope, who had rallied his forces after sailing clear across the ocean from the Holy Empire and fighting his way tooth and nail to this decisive moment. On the other was the Marquis of Order, a veritable folk hero. At last, they found themselves face to face, their forces matched in strength, with no meddlers around to interfere. This battle could have only one victor. Guyuan wasn't Chang'eng, a young man who could take to the battlefield with nothing more than the fire in his blood. He methodically laid out his troops on both land and sea, mixing genuine attacks with feints to test the enemy's strength as he attempted to surround and detain the enemy flagship. But this time, he found an opponent who met him blow for blow. The general at the helm was no longer Mr. Jia, that coward who'd run at anything you dangled in front of him, but an old and spicy chunk of ginger. Guyuan tested him a few times, nearly managing to lure his adversary's right flank into a chase with a series of quick attacks by a formation of dragonettes. But the enemy flagship lurking within the bulk of their forces reacted swiftly each time to restore their formation. The western sea monster looked clumsy, but the vessel's defense was impregnable, weapons bristling from every centimeter of its surface. Its ugly iron carapace yawned open to reveal one cannon muzzle after another. The cavernous bowels of the sea monster stored an unimaginable amount of violet gold and ammunition. With such a vessel in the fleet, enemy hawks could land and refuel at any time, allowing them to pin their opponents down from the air across the battlefield. At the same time, from his secure position in the center of the fleet, the sea monster's commander could direct and consolidate the surrounding dragon warships with ease. The great ship was like a queen bee, gathering all of its drones into a seamless whole, even if most of them were rather dim or varied vastly in ability. "See that?" Guyuan pointed, speaking to Yao Zhen. "That hulking giant in the center has taken direct control instead of giving their flanks autonomy. I'd say that Pope finally made their little troublemaker walk the plank." Worry was written in every line of Yao Chongsa's face. "Marshal, they've been the ones shamelessly suing for peace. Why attack us now?" Guyuan licked his lips. "I'm guessing they've had some news from home. Something's giving them a shot of courage. I'm starting to get a handle on that old bastard's style. He likes to start with a bombardment, a test of his enemy's defenses, and adjust his strategy as soon as it fails. But look, he's got something up his sleeve. He wouldn't go all in like this if he didn't have supplies to back him up. Their supply lines probably swing around the open seas and run through the Dongying archipelago, where our defenses are weak." Yao Zhen was the clear-headed sort. He grasped Guyuan's meaning at once. "Marshal, if that is true, we can't afford to fight him head-on like this. The railway is still under construction. Even if we request supplies now, they may not come in time. What should we do?" The far western army's violent bombardment filled the river and sea, igniting the surface of the water until it looked like the lowest level of hell. Violet gold burned to thin trails of white steam in the bellies of these iron beasts like it didn't cost a cent, rising into the air along with the tiny impurities and smoke. A layer of mist rose to cover the bright moon and stars in the sky, then gathered into heavy clouds. As the two armies struggled into the latter half of the night, it began to rain. A messenger jogged over. "Sir, the cuttlefish submersibles are ready." "Dragons, tighten that formation. All hawks board the flagship and prepare to weigh anchor." Guyuan threw a glance back at Yao Zhen as he strode toward the command vessel. "Chongzisheng, you hold the fort on shore. There's no need to follow me further." Yao Zhen let out a ringing laugh. "Perhaps I've been a coward in the past, but what have I to fear with the marshal at my side?" Despite his confident declaration, Governor Yao found himself regretting his words soon enough as he struggled to keep down his gorge on the swaying deck of the ship. The Lingshu Institute had refitted the flagship's propulsion system according to Guyuan's specifications, and the craft was a white streak among the waves, nearly as fast as the smaller dragonettes that sailed like the wind. Command ships were ordinarily steadier vessels, but this was not the case under Guyuan. Even if he flew to the heights of absurdity, the thousands of dragon warships and dragonettes of the fleet bent to his every command. Wary of underestimating the enemy, the Western Navy turned out in full force, attempting to intercept and encircle Great Liang's ships. In this, the Western Navy's impenetrable formations became a hindrance instead of a help. Guyuan had an excellent grasp of the rhythm of battle, advancing and retreating in turns. The instant the enemy concentrated their fire on any given spot, his ships would scatter and reform elsewhere moments later, like a keen blade held to the enemy's neck, forcing them to dance to his tune. Gradually, every command coming from the Western sea monster was followed by the words, "Hold steady." But this was no easy battlefield to hold. Guyuan quickly located the weakest section of the far western fleet. Rallying his ships, he sharpened Great Liang's navy into a dagger and streaked toward it. The Western sea monster was too cumbersome to respond with quickness. The Pope was forced to his last resort. "Flagship, open all shutters. Load the heavy cannons. All other vessels clear out." Across the water, Guyuan smiled at Yao Zheng. "There's much we can learn from the design of this Western sea monster, but I never ordered one from the Lingshu Institute. While we have the right idea in theory, our engineering skills are not quite up to the task. Maybe in a decade or two, we can make a better one." He trailed off, distracted by the sight of the Western Dragon warships, which had been closely encircling the sea monster, fleeing in all directions. "This is our opening," Guyuan said. "Cuttlefish, get moving." "Marshal!" Yao Zheng cried out in alarm. "Forget the opening! Look out!" The Western sea monster raised its ink-black shell, revealing a row of heavy cannon muzzles. Guyuan didn't blink. "Onto course due southwest and full speed ahead. Fire at will. These tiny ships can't stop us." Two thunderous booms sounded in a quick staccato, nearly merging into a single roar. The Great Liang fleet opened fire, short barrel cannons blasting through the fleeing Western dragonets to charge unimpeded into enemy waters. Artillery fire from the Western flagship followed, brushing dangerously close to their hulls. Guyuan's flagship shuddered, and Yao Zheng clung to a mast with all four limbs. Guyuan lost his balance on the bucking deck and crashed into a wall. "Marshal!" Yao Zheng's voice was tight with fright. Guyuan shook his head and crawled up, unbothered, a frightening gleam in his eye. "It's time for dessert." Water surged and fell under the bombardment of artillery fire. No one on the Western ships noticed the peculiarly shaped dragon warships gliding toward them beneath the waves. These were the so-called cuttlefish submersibles freshly delivered from the Lingshu Institute. The most daring tactical unit among seafaring dragons. They could travel completely underwater, and their pilots could bail out after locking in their bearing. The warships that carried the cuttlefish pulled the pilots back up via ropes, while the unmanned vessel would shoot forward at its original speed until it detonated upon collision with its target in the water. These had been specially designed for the enormous sea monster and its significant draft, untouchable by attack above the waterline. One side of the Far Westerner's rock-solid front line crumbled to nothing beneath Guyuan's charge. A moment later, a plume of water shot dozens of meters into the air, fire flickered across the surface of the waves, and before the Far Westerners could grasp what they'd seen, the sea monster flagship gave a violent shudder. The cuttlefish had hit their mark. The monster's outer shell, hard as iron, was not impenetrable after all. The great ship listed heavily to the side. The soldier responsible for the signal lamp tumbled from his perch on the mainmast to an unknown fate below the waves before he could utter a sound, and the enemy army's clean formation broke apart into chaos. Guyuan would never give them time to breathe. Every hawk aboard Great Liang's flagship rose into the air and streaked after the fleeing dragon warships almost faster than the eye could see. The tense naval battle stretched through the night until the sky paled to a fish belly white in the east. The Far Westerners hadn't burned through their rich reservoir of supplies, but the formation was shattered. The Pope had gotten a bitter taste of Guyuan's cunning on the field, and even if he choked down blood in frustration, he could do nothing but order a temporary retreat and await his next opportunity. Guyuan heaved a sigh of relief. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Make a token effort to pursue, but don't draw out the encounter." If the far westerners had retreated even a moment later, a good number of Great Liang's dragonettes would have burned through their violet gold and been unable to return to the shore and refuel. At that point, even Gu Yuan would have found himself on the defensive. Mr. Jia had been right. The new Great Liang Navy still lacked the ability to fight on the high seas. The enemy commander is getting on in years. He is a meticulous man and difficult to fool, but he's cautious too. If we'd faced a brute like our Black Iron Battalion's He Zhonghui on the battlefield, even if we blew his flagship to smithereens, he would have commandeered a little skiff to fight to the last. We would have been in real trouble then. Gu Yuan absent-mindedly rubbed his eyes, voice low. His vision was blurring again. He hadn't noticed earlier, tense as he was, and only now recalled it was time for his medicine. He gave the still shell-shocked Yao Zhen a smile and called out, "All ships return to port." But even after returning to the commander's tent, Gu Yuan didn't rest. He had an emergency military dispatch to pin to the court and had needed to requisition supplies so they wouldn't get caught off balance again. After calling someone to brew him a bowl of medicine and drinking it down, he ground his ink and considered how to counter the far western army in the coming days as he waited for it to take effect. A spike of pain shot from a newly acquired bruise on his back up to the crown of his head. Gu Yuan's hand faltered, and the ink stick slipped from his fingers. He clenched his teeth and pressed his palms into the table, waiting for the wave of pain to pass. But this time, the torment was severe, lasting nearly an hour before it gradually began to dull. Gu Yuan's back was soaked in cold sweat. It was then that he discovered a critical issue. His vision and hearing, which should have been clearing up again by now, had not recovered in the least. Chapter 119. Longing. Gu Yuan's heart sank as he looked down at the blurry medicine bowl in front of him in dazed realization. He didn't panic. He'd known this day was coming, but, like many things, knowledge made it no easier to accept. Every person knew they would die one day. Yet, when it came time to close their eyes at last, who wouldn't be reluctant to go? Their formidable foes had retreated, but the Liangjiang garrison was still abuzz with activity, and the sirens' warning of enemy attack had yet to be silenced, their wails piercing the air. But in Gu Yuan's ears, that sound was no more than a distant sigh. His world was blurred and quiet, the black ink and white paper on the table no more than two fuzzy patches of color. Gu Yuan sat unmoving by the table for a quarter hour, unconsciously tightening his fingers around the string of beads the late emperor had left him. It was strange. Gu Yuan had spent most of his life on the borders or running all across the nation, accumulating bumps and scratches in every corner of the land. The string connecting these beads had broken on numerous occasions, but he had recovered them every time without exception. By now, he had changed the string thrice, yet still hadn't lost a single bead. They were still there, cool and covered in a layer of morning mist, resting over the stark bones of his wrist. As if the man who had both cherished and maimed him had been watching over him all this time. It was the sensation of those wooden beads digging into his skin that snapped Gu Yuan out of his trance. He said nothing about the failure of his medicine, but pulled out the glass monocle he used in emergencies and placed it on the bridge of his nose. A flick of his finger shattered the bowl into pieces. He gathered the shards together and swept them into a corner of the room. Sitting back down, he wrote the dispatch and a requisition for supplies, then summoned a messenger to deliver them. Yao Zhen came in on the messenger's heels. Seeing the monocle perched on Gu Yuan's nose, he asked, "Marshal, have you not yet taken your medicine?" Gu Yuan had gotten quite adept at lip reading and replied as if nothing was amiss. "I accidentally dropped the bowl. Forget it. There's no need to brew another dose. It's not urgent. I could send those hairy foreigners packing even if I went blind tomorrow." Yao Zhen looked at the pile of shards in the corner, an ominous cloud rising at the back of his mind. But finding nothing to justify his worry, he merely said, "After this battle, things may change again in the capital." Gu Yuan hummed in acknowledgement. "Chongzisheng, could I trouble you to send an urgent missive to the northern border? Summon Shen Jiping here. I need to adjust military deployments on all 4 borders. And Chen..." He stopped. Yao Zhen asked, confused, "Who?" "Nobody." Gu Yuan shook his head. "Go on." The cure for Changgang's Wu Ge still depended on Chen Qingxu. He couldn't afford to divert her attention now. The emergency military dispatch reached the capital that evening. Li Fang sent someone to drag Changgang back from the National Temple overnight, and the warm pavilion was once again crowded with the high-ranking officials of the court. Changgang's eyelids wouldn't stop twitching. A sharp sense of foreboding had pricked him all the way to the palace. He stirred restlessly. When someone handed him the report from the front lines, he held his breath and read the brief report over 7 or 8 times, confirming that it was indeed written in Gu Yuan's own clean hand, the strokes of each character neat and powerful. When he had penned this report, at least, he had been well. Only then did Changgang let out a long-held breath. He gathered himself, closed his eyes for a moment, and thought, "I nearly gave myself a fright." The turbid stream of his thoughts cleared. The battle was good news for him. If the war became critical again, Fang Qin would stand no chance of disbanding the Grand Council. Forget Li Fang. The garrisons of Great Liang's border would never allow it. Changgang would have much more room to maneuver. Their enemy had presented him with exactly the opening he needed. Fang Qin, on the other hand, was distressed in the extreme. He had tossed and turned through countless sleepless nights over the past 6 months, pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into rallying the high-ranking officials from noble families who had previously been as scattered as a pile of sand. He had planned for every contingency and finally begun to see the first stages of victory. The cries for the dissolution of the Grand Council had grown louder and louder. Prince Yan had found himself hard-pressed to keep his head above water as his right-hand men were embroiled in a wave of scandals of their own. Fang Qin only needed to give them a final push. Yet the far Westerners had chosen this exact moment to cause trouble. Had Great Liang initiated the hostilities, he could have criticized the Marquis of Order for wasting the energies on their army on reckless warfare. But according to the report, it was their enemy who had launched a sneak attack during the night. Disband the Grand Council. Li Fang took a stack of memorials from a palace attendant. Reduce military spending. Investigate corrupt civil merchants encroaching on land without authorization. The warm pavilion was utterly silent. Li Fang cast a stack of memorials to the ground. The far Westerners haven't even fully retreated from our borders. Look at all of you, so eager to yank firewood from under the cauldron for our enemy's benefit. Fang Qin gritted his teeth and swallowed his prepared speech. He had thought to speak first and control the flow of the conversation, but Li Fang had beaten him to the punch. At this point, the first person who was tactless enough to speak might quickly find themselves charged with treason. Li Fang's gaze fell on Changgang. As for you, do you think yourself the victim in all of this? Our ministers say a few words against you, and you abandon your post, running home in a huff. How many times is this now? You're a grown man. Have you no other tricks? The Grand Council is empty from dawn till dusk, and the only people still working are a couple of sweepers at the gate. Li Min, I say it now. Get your ass back to the Grand Council first thing tomorrow, or don't come back at all. The core members of the Grand Council fell to their knees alongside Prince Yan in apology. Li Fang didn't ask them to rise. He turned to the newly appointed Chief Justice of the Imperial Court of Judicial Review. Jiang Kangshi came from the Imperial Court of Judicial Review, your former superior. Do you really find it so difficult to investigate one old case against him, or are you planning to drag it out until the new year? With the emperor's ire suddenly turned on him, the Chief Justice didn't dare say a word as he knelt along with his neighbors in the Grand Council. Li Fang picked out each high-ranking official in turn and reprimanded them until everyone was beaten and bloody. Fang Qin was one of the few who'd kept his nose clean, and the emperor let him off with a few words of caution. Compared to Prince Yan, who hadn't been allowed to rise since his knees hit the floor, Li Fang was practically genial and had merely one point of critique. Dear Minister Fang, the far Western Army has come with sinister intent. We cannot allow ourselves to be disadvantaged over matters of logistics. You oversee the Ministry of Revenue. Redouble your efforts. Fang Qin had no choice but to lower his head and agree. He felt as if he'd had a basin of cold water dumped over his head. After this evening, everything he'd worked toward for so long stood to be wiped out in a single stroke. The neglected office of the Grand Council bustled once again, aglow with lamplight through the night. Upon his return, Prince Yan's first act was to give a bracing speech. The situation on the borders is pressing. I urge everyone to put matters of national security first. Sometimes we must suffer indignities to serve our nation. Even the most unassailable coalition will one day splinter. Mark my words. In the end, we will get the reward we deserve. As for Han Shishong, you needn't worry. Now that His Majesty has spoken, he will surely return unscathed in a matter of days. Everyone watched him in silence. Our games with the War Beacon tickets are over, he continued. Let's consider what we can do with the Longan Bank. Recall the 3 things I told you we must rip from our noble adversaries' hands: the silver in their wallets, the land beneath their feet, and the respect of the world's scholars. We have a solid grasp on the first, while the second is a strike at their very foundations and will certainly invite retribution. If we can stand our ground, the third, as well as all that follows, will flow like water into a ready channel. Someone raised their voice. Your Highness, shall we continue our investigation into corruption among imperial merchants and illicit collusions between merchants and officials? The war, the national economy, and the livelihoods of the common folk are our priority. But if any miscreant insists on blocking our way, we needn't hold back. Do well the tasks you have been assigned, and as for everything else, even if the sky should fall, I will hold it up for you. Chang'e turned away with the flick of his sleeves. Get to work. Present me with a plan tomorrow. His words struck with the solidity of a promise. The Grand Council, the Lingshu Institute, the Canal Commission, the major merchants with their deep coffers, the upstart faction that had overrun half the court, all began to revolve around the heavenly body at their center in a perfectly choreographed dance, each attending to their own duties. 5 days later, the Imperial Court of Judicial Review reached a verdict in Jiang Chong's case, and he returned to his original post. The Liangjiang garrison put out an official call to arms, declaring their intent to wage war against foreign invaders and recover ancestral land. Guyuan fought 3 skirmishes against the far western navy in 5 days, not giving a centimeter. At the same time, he dispatched orders to adjust the structure of the military garrisons on all borders. He bestowed 7 golden arrow tickets of command within a day, all of which needed to be filed with the Grand Council. The Grand Council's errand runners became runners in truth, kicking up clouds of dust beneath their soles as they rushed to and fro. Chang'e sprawled out on his desk as the night watchman struck the 4th watch and took a brief nap. His sleep was restless. Thanks to the influence of the Wu'er, it was a miracle for him to have a relatively clear nightmare. Most of what he got were dark and jumbled impressions. At times like this, even the sound of someone flipping the pages of a book next door could startle him awake. The Wu'er was wicked as the evil god whence it took its name. Most often, he would wake tense with agitation and malice. But today, when Chang'e started awake at the sound of footfalls outside his door and lifted his head from where it had been pillowed on his arms, his heart pounded in confused disorder. He felt none of the usual irritation he had on waking, but rather a deep sense of sorrow and disquiet. When he looked down, he found his sleeve was stained with tears. A voice from the doorway. Your Highness, a missive from Jiangnan. Chang'e sucked in a discreet breath. Bring it here. It was news of another major operation from Guyuan. He planned to send reinforcements to the southwest. He stated no reason, but laid out a meticulous report listing the location of the garrison, the commander, details of coordination between various military branches, and routes for the transport of rations. Chang'e swiftly read through the whole thing. He wasn't deeply versed in military strategy and didn't manage to take any deeper meaning from the plans, so he merely processed the report and set it aside to be filed. Only then did he discover a personal letter from Guyuan lying beneath the official correspondence. Perhaps letter was not quite accurate. It was a single strip of paper with a brief few words, bracketed with neither salutation nor signature. Our separation has been too long. I miss you dearly. Guyuan's letters were sometimes romantic, sometimes licentious, sometimes openly flirtatious and at other times slyly playful. But he rarely said things like, "I miss you," in full sincerity. Chang'eng started in surprise, his fatigue evaporating in an instant. He felt as if those inked words had become an arrow that punched through his chest without warning. He wished he could take back every last grandiloquent, ambitious word he had spoken. What Grand Council? Toss them all aside, forget everything, and run off to see Gu Yuan that very instant. Chang'eng squeezed that strip of paper in his hand, then painstakingly rolled it up and stored it away in his ever-present sachet, trying to calm himself. He carefully read through the set of rules and regulations for the Longan Bank that the Grand Council had drafted, but despite the lines of neat handwriting marching across the page before his eyes, not a single character reached his brain. Within the time it took an incense stick to fall to ash, he found himself unable to sit still. He snatched up his cloak and delivered an order. "Prepare my horse." Seeing the prince in such a rush, everyone thought he rode out on the most urgent business. They hurried to saddle his steed and back out of the way, watching him race off in a cloud of dust. Chang'eng rode for the national temple at a gallop. The mountain temple was quiet at this early hour, its doors pulled shut to wait for dawn. Fallen leaves danced in the autumn wind, and the entrance was lit only by a single lamp standing solemnly at the gate, its flame flickering in the night. Even here, the air was redolent with the sedate scent of sandalwood incense. Liao Zhen had long gone to bed. When Chang'eng charged inside, he kicked up a breeze that sent the sutras on the table fluttering around the room. Liao Zhen jerked awake, staring in naked shock as Prince Yan swept in, cloaked in chilly wind. Chang'eng's eyes were faintly red. He sank down into a seat and croaked, "Tea, do you have any?" Draping his monk's robe over his shoulders, Liao Zhen grabbed a handful of kuding tea leaves from his shabby wooden drawers and put some water on to boil. Although the room was drafty and the cups were chipped, the monk was calm and steady in his movements as he heated the water and brewed the tea in perfect silence. He kept his eyes on his task as steam rose in snowy white tendrils, calling to mind the rumble and hiss of engines and armor. It condensed on the low ceiling, sliding to the ends of the specially shaped rafters to drip into hanging earthen bowls with bright planks. Chang'eng's eyes followed the cycle from stream to water drop, starting from the weathered ceramic pot and ending in the ring of little bowls with peeling paint nestled in the corners of the monastic cell's ceiling. He breathed a soft sigh, his heart gradually smoothing its roiling agitation. Liao Zhen steeped a cup of kuding in boiling water and placed it in front of Chang'eng. Even the scent was bitter. "Thank you." Chang'eng accepted the cup. Feeling had begun to return to his fingers, icy cold after his ride through the night wind. When he took a sip, the tea was scalding hot, numbing the tip of his tongue. He looked at Liao Zhen and grimaced. "I've been too busy these past few days and have been agitated. I failed to properly suppress the wu-erge. I apologize for making a spectacle of myself, Great Master." Liao Zhen finally met his eyes. "The far Westerners are adept at finding chinks in our defenses," he signed. "Yet this time they chose their moment poorly. Although they appear mighty, they are in truth at the end of their rope. Marshal Gu is more than capable of commanding all four borders, to say nothing of the Liangjiang theater. Once the railway is completed, people and supplies can travel freely back and forth between Jiangbei and the capital in the space of a day. Given our current store of violet gold, with any luck, we'll recover all our lost territory within a year or two. Your Highness, what need is there to worry?" His words made perfect sense, but for some reason Chang'eng still felt uneasy. "Xiao Cao is with Master Du, is he not?" Chang'eng said quietly. "They're not far from Liangjiang. Perhaps he can check on him in my stead. I'll write a letter and ask Xiao Cao to take a post in the military. His talent lies in the art of disguise, but Master Du doesn't have much use for him beyond running errands. He may as well go to the front lines." Liao Zhen nodded. "Your Highness doesn't wish Marshal Gu to return to the capital. Is this not perfect timing?" Gu Yuan was Prince Yan's weakness, but this weakness had never been threatened in any real sense. With war looming, no one could touch Guyuan. Li Feng's abilities as a ruler may have been mediocre, but he wasn't so foolish as to tear down his own defenses a second time. For Guyuan, the constant bloodshed and danger of the battlefield was its own form of protection. Chang'eng frowned. He finished his cup of kuding, then muttered, "Everyone depends on him, but who worries over his illnesses and injuries? When I think about it, sometimes I really—" At this point, his eyes collided with the mute monk's pity-filled gaze. Chang'eng stopped and lowered his head with a soft chuckle. "I said too much again. I ought to up my dosage of pacifying fragrance." Liao Zhen could see he only wanted to calm himself, so he let the topic go. He took his wooden fish from beneath the table, lowered his lashes, and struck it in a lazy beat. The tap of the wooden fish and plinks of dripping water were the only sounds in the small cell. Amid this rhythmic backdrop, Chang'eng sat on the low couch and rested his eyes, only saying his goodbyes when the sky began to brighten. As he rose to leave, Liao Zhen rapped on the table, drawing Chang'eng's attention. He signed to Chang'eng, "Your Highness, this humble monk was honored by the opportunity to listen in on your meeting with Master Du, but there is one thing I could not understand." Chang'eng's exhaustion-bruised eyes flickered as he raised a brow. "Your Highness, you said all the profits in the world add up to the size of a meat pie. Everyone wants the largest slice, and there is nothing inherently good or evil about this desire. But some wish to follow the flow of progress, to expand the total size of the pie and thereby increase their own share. These people may lay the foundations of a prosperous nation and peace for the people. Others, however, wish to stand against the flow of progress. Their own portion is already moldering, yet they want to hoard even more to molder along with it. These people attract naught but disaster. Nowadays, over half the pie has fallen into the hands of the old noble families. If we wish to overturn the status quo and scrape away the mold on our nation bit by bit—" "Great Master," Chang'eng asked, "is there anything wrong with what I said?" "There isn't." Liao Zhen shook his head, wide sleeves rustling the motions of his hands. "But this humble monk was thinking, all the nation's land belongs to the sovereign. The marching orders decree and gold consolidation decree are ready evidence of this. Everything your highness has so arduously worked for may be wiped out by a single stroke of a pen in the future, and all your efforts rendered as insubstantial as a flower in the mirror of the moon and water." Chang'eng tapped his finger lightly on the table, his face absent any ripple of emotion. Evidently, Liao Zhen's concerns were something he had also considered. "The great master is correct." He lowered his handsome eyes and laughed lightly. His sharp profile was that of a wicked god staring menacingly out from some totem. Liao Zhen's heart thudded in his chest, and his mouth briefly went dry. He suddenly wondered. Prince Yan seemed to be fighting with the old noble families over the prize of imperial favor. But was that really his true intent? Chapter 120. Hope. Cao Chunhua didn't tarry after receiving the Linyuan wooden bird. He handed over what tasks he was responsible for and set off at once for the Liangzhang garrison. As he neared his destination, he caught the faint scent of gunpowder. A frightful aura seemed to loom out in the humid, chilly air. He subconsciously straightened his spine and left off humming and winking at the random passers-by he saw along the way, stiffening himself into the shape of a respectable young man. The garrison was under heavy guard, and not a single sentry could be spotted whispering to a companion. It was utterly silent, save for the battle cries rising from where ranks of soldiers were drilling in formation not far away. Cao Chunhua rubbed his eyes. For a moment he thought he'd walked into the camp of the Black Iron Battalion. A guard blocked his approach. Cao Chunhua knew better than to joke around in Guyuan's camps. He wasted no time producing the documents of passage sent to him by the Grand Council. The average age of this row of guards couldn't have been more than 18, but after verifying his papers, they neither attempted to flatter him nor committed any breach of etiquette. One guard stepped out of the ranks to lead him to the commander's tent. By the time Cao Chunhua turned back, he saw that the remainder had seamlessly closed the one-man gap in the line. His guide was shy at first, but his tongue loosened once he heard Cao Chunhua had fought against the northern barbarians with Guyuan. "The far westerners won't find us easy pickings with the marshal here," he boasted. "They can't win a head-to-head battle, so they've been circling Liangjiang's harbors launching guerrilla attacks. My captain says they may try to turn this into a war of attrition. Sir, everyone says our great Liang is vast in territory and rich in resources. Are the far westerners so rich too?" "Don't call me sir. I'm just an errand runner." Cao Chunhua waved a hand, then continued. "I don't understand these things either, but I've heard Master Du speak of it. Look at these battleships of theirs. They're specially designed for long ocean voyages and naval battles. Remember how they blasted open Jiangnan Harbor and Dagu Harbor a few years ago? If they bested even our navy so easily, think of all those tiny nations scattered like marble across the sea. Once they conquer a place, they devour it, rob it of its resources, erect factories that couldn't operate in their own nation, and force the captive populace to work for them, draining them of fat and blood. With enough time, of course they'd become rich." His guide was silent the rest of the way to Guyuan's tent. As they waited for Guyuan's personal guard to go inside and report Cao Chunhua's arrival, the young soldier spoke up again. "Sir, I've heard the old veterans talk about the Jiangnan Navy before the war. They said back when General Zhao was in charge, salaries were high and there was little work to do, and their training was lax compared to other regional garrisons. When they weren't on duty, they could go ashore and wander amid the apricot blossoms in misty rain. I used to think I'd been born at the wrong time. If I'd enlisted in peacetime, maybe I could have lazed my days into becoming a respected serviceman too." Cao Chunhua glanced back at him. Abashed, the young guard flashed him a small smile. "After talking to you today, I finally see how short-sighted that was. After all, the man who can pick up a blade and fight is more fortunate than the animal herded about by others." "Young Master Cao." The guard on duty at the commander's tent had re-emerged. "The marshal invites you inside." Cao Chunhua blinked and stepped inside the commander's tent. The first thing he noticed was the glaringly gaudy glass monocule Guyuan had fixed on the bridge of his nose. The intricate filigree radiating from the lens threatened to overwhelm its wearer, and the frame arched up from the bridge of his nose all the way to his temple, covering practically half his face. It was less a monocule than a mask. Cao Chunhua stared. What happened to the marshal's eyes? But everyone in the tent was talking business, and Cao Chunhua dared not interrupt. Shen Yi and Yao Zhen were both present, the latter reading out a letter from the far westerners. "The hairy foreigners say they approach in good faith with intentions of peace and fellowship to propose that 4 commanderies of Jiangnan be ceded as an international zone, independently governed by their own local garrison to protect the interests of Western merchants. In the future, this place may become an important link between our nations and maritime trade. Oh, they also say they deeply love this land and do not wish to see good, fertile soil laid waste by war." Shen Yi frowned. "Yesterday it was 3 commanderies. Why are they asking for a 4th today?" Yao Zhan looked at him in helpless exasperation. "Perhaps because of how deeply they love it?" "They can fuck off." The whorls of the gaudy monocule Guyuan wore were elegant, yet the words he spoke were anything but. "What the hell are they doing falling in love with our land? As if they have any right to it." Shen Yi was silent. There wasn't much he could say to that. A giggle escaped Cao Chunhua at the door. Looking up, Shen Yi hurriedly waved him over. "Xiao Cao is here. Heaven knows how long we've been waiting for you. Come, tell us when that iron earthworm of ours will be ready." "Ai, Shen Qianshang, do you have to call it that?" "Soon," Cao Chunhua replied. "We have no shortage of manpower. The northern tracks are basically laid, and the south will be easier since we won't need to pause construction in the winter. Once all the sections are connected, the steam locomotive can run from the capital straight to the shores of the Yangtze. Master Du says if all goes smoothly, we could complete it by the end of the year. Ah, Marshal, why the monocle today?" "Nice, isn't it?" Guyuan grinned shamelessly, the corners of his peach blossom eyes curving sharply upward as if about to take flight. I broke one the other day, so I commissioned a famous artisan from Yangzhou Prefecture to make this new one. I can't bear to keep such a beautiful thing hidden away. So I thought, why not put it out on display daily for everyone to see? Shen Yi looked like he had a stomach ache. Ayo, my dear Marshal, you had better keep it hidden. The eyes of the mortals are undeserving of such beauty. Guyuan ignored him. He tilted his face to give Cao Chunhua a good look from all angles, running his mouth all the while. If all else fails, I'll personally take to the battlefield and seduce them. I may not be able to fell 1,000,000 mighty troops, but 20 or 30,000 should be no problem. Isn't that right, Xiao Cao? Cao Chunhua's face went red with a fwoom. Shen Yi and Yao Zhen could hardly bear to watch. Both turned their faces away. Your timing is impeccable. Guyuan leapt to his feet and slung his arm around the scarlet-faced Cao Chunhua's shoulder, steering him over to the sand table. I've got a job for you. No one else will do. There's an errand I need you to run for me. Whether Guyuan's innovative new seduction tactics would be effective against the Far Westerners remained unknown, but they were certainly effective against Cao Chunhua. His face went a deep shade of crimson and sweat prickled on the back of his neck. Guyuan could have asked anything of him at that moment, and he would have readily agreed. Cao Chunhua stumbled out of the commander's tent in a daze. As the cool air hit him, he started in shock. Wait, hadn't Prince Yan sent him south to keep an eye on the marshal? How had he gotten conned into herring off to the southwestern border within an hour of his arrival? Guyuan had even taken pains to instruct him that this mission was a deadly secret and that he must let his orders rot in his belly the instant he left the commander's tent. Not even the Grand Council was to know. What was he supposed to tell Prince Yan? Shen Yi personally showed the dejected Cao Chunhua to his lodgings before returning to Guyuan. Yao Zhen had gone, and the lights in the commander's tent were dim. Shen Yi found Guyuan with his long legs propped up on a nearby bench, arms crossed over his chest, deep in contemplation about who knew what. Ever since he had lost his hearing, he was no longer vexed by the flood of observations gleaned through his exceptional powers of perception. He found it very easy to focus on his own thoughts. The breeze of the opening tent flapped alerted Guyuan, and he looked up at Shen Yi. Have you finished? Shen Yi nodded. Do you really intend to use Xiao Cao, or are you just afraid he'll tattle on you to His Highness Prince Yan? Am I the sort who'd use official pretenses for personal affairs? Guyuan arched a brow. Before Shen Yi could apologize and express remorse, he continued. It's both. Shen Yi had no words. Was this what he considered separating business from personal affairs? Now that fighting has broken out here in the south, there will be chances in the court, and Chang'eng shouldn't be overexerting himself in his condition. So there's really not much else we can do. I've only had a little mishap. I don't want to distract him from his work. In any case, I really do need someone both sharp and trustworthy to take on the mission I've given Xiao Cao, Guyuan said. That old geezer we're facing thinks he's so impressive, fighting his way here all across the sea. I think it's time I show him the difference between a general and a marshal. Shen Yi was of two minds. On the one hand, as a veteran of the Black Iron Battalion, he would willingly lay down his life for his marshal. On the other, Guyuan's shameless boasting gave him gooseflesh. He was once again at a loss for words. He was left to plead with him. Zushi, even if you're going blind, can't you wear a more normal monocle? Guyuan donned his armor and readied his gear to go on patrol, their commander personally patrolling every day like he was a recruit showing up for roll call was another specialty of the Liangzhang garrison, though he could hardly see a few meters in front of his face. I won't, he said, all earnestness. I want to follow the example of the Prince of Lanling, renowned for his beauty as well as his military prowess. Shen Yi was beginning to suspect this bastard hadn't summoned him from the northwest to share his worries at all. He was just messing with him. After arriving in Jiangnan, Cao Chunhua had time to write only one letter to Chang'eng. He conveyed that Marshal Gu filled his days with military affairs and bullion Shenzhen, and that he otherwise seemed in good health. Whether Gu Yuan had sent him off on a job, or whether he was simply overjoyed to be in the marshal's presence that he forgot his duties entirely, this was the last Chang'eng heard from him. Recalling Cao Chunhua's terminal puppy crush on Gu Yuan, Chang'eng felt a twinge of envy. But at the same time, he was assured no news was good news. If Cao Chunhua could afford to dally all day in an infatuated daze, Gu Yuan was probably handling the situation with the ease Liao Zhen suggested. At the same time, Chen Qingxu reached the capital, arriving just before the date of the Double Ninth Festival. Chang'eng broke his month-long streak of camping out in the Grand Council and took a rare half-day off to receive her. When he had first read in Gu Yuan's letter that they had found a record of the goddess's secret techniques with Jialai Yinghuo, Chang'eng had indeed been fretful with anticipation, like an old-faced spirit who had spent a lifetime hiding itself among ordinary mortals, finally hearing it could become one of them. But after his return to the capital, his attention had been consumed by drawing up plans and spinning schemes at lightning speed while dodging a hail of attacks from his political enemies. He really had no time to worry about anything else, and his nervousness only returned now that he was about to meet Chen Qingxu in person. Chen Qingxu was never one to revel in suspense. The second she saw Chang'eng, she skipped the formalities and delivered her opening salvo. "It can be cured." Those few words were enough to freeze Chang'eng in place for more than a moment, until, lightheaded, he finally let out his held breath. "A chronic ailment that rooted itself in my blood shortly after I left my mother's belly can still be cured?" Chen Qingxu nodded. "It can." Hidden in the sleeves of his court robes, Chang'eng's hands spasmed, but his voice was steady as ever. "They say the creation of the wicked god involves merging the flesh and blood of two people into one. If I have been two people all my life, then how, Miss Chen, how can you split them apart?" A rare smile touched the edges of Chen Qingxu's mouth. "It will take some time, and I'm afraid you will suffer somewhat in the process." Chang'eng's heart was in his throat. "Then, Zushi?" There were relevant writings on the poison along the records of the goddess's secret techniques, but their system of medicine is different from ours, and there are many points I must verify. I will have to sort through the information before I can say anything definitive. Chang'eng drew in a deep breath, his heart racing so fast he felt it might burst through his chest. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He wanted to tell Gu Yuan that very instant, and turned as if to stride out the door. But he only made it a few steps before he halted and clapped a hand to his forehead. "I'm losing it. I can't let him know. On the battlefield, blades have no eyes. What if he has an accident because he's distracted?" Lacking anyone with whom he could share his good news, His Highness Prince Yan instead did something highly embarrassing. After escorting Miss Chen to her lodgings, he slipped away to the Marquis estate, holed himself up in Gu Yuan's room, and secretly penned a letter. He didn't send it, but rather waited for it to dry and slid it beneath Gu Yuan's pillow. Still not satisfied, he pulled out his secret collection of all the letters Gu Yuan had ever written him. He lay on the bed mentally running through every sort of thing Gu Yuan might say, then pieced together an imagined reply from Gu Yuan, spending the evening amusing himself in a lively one-man show. For the next week, Chang'eng's world was bright. Even the sight of Fang Qin, when Chang'eng happened upon him during the day, was more pleasing to his eyes. Fang Qin, on the other hand, was having a rather miserable time. These days, the reports on Li Feng's desk impeaching Prince Yan had piled into a stack half a meter high. To anyone who read them, it would seem Prince Yan couldn't do a single thing right. If he so much as coughed while walking along the road, someone would say the hunch of his shoulders was evidence of deceitful acts against his sovereign. In contrast, the young upstarts under the Grand Council seemed to shrink back, abandoning their former habit of fighting each accusation. Whether they were too busy with work or simply lying low, Fang Qin couldn't guess. Li Feng's official opinion was that he had none, especially in response to the buffoons who tried to exploit their seniority by bringing up the late emperor or even Emperor Wu. In fact, the one who was most anxious about the situation wasn't the Grand Council, which was already treading on thin ice, but Fang Qin himself. He strongly opposed ganging up on them like this. His Majesty's heart is as clear as a mirror, he had cautioned. Everyone, aren't you afraid of losing imperial favor by slinging accusations at a time like this? Minister Fang, someone had replied, all you speak of is imperial favor. Aren't you thinking too small? The late emperor came up as an unremarkable son of the commandery prince from a collateral branch of the Li family. How do you think he became the master of the imperial palace so easily? My family swept aside the opposition and led the charge to support his right to ascend. How much have we contributed to the success of his reign? The iron certificate with cinnabar writing awarded for our service is displayed in a place of honor in my home to this day. Now that his sons and grandsons have a stable claim on the nation, do they intend to cast aside those who've helped raise them to their seat on the throne? Another person said, if he really pushes us, we can bring out the late emperor's memorial tablet. Would the Son of Heaven really risk committing a dreadful taboo and ignore the laws established by his forefathers? Fang Qin sucked in a harsh breath. My lords, please mind your words, he snapped. He was a respected minister. Everyone fell silent, although from their expressions it was clear they weren't happy about it. Every noble of Great Liang, regardless of the prestige of the official titles held by their family heads, could drown a person in the pages of their genealogies. Most were bound by marriage to plenty of other influential clans and became inextricably mixed up in power struggles within the imperial household generation after generation. Nearly all the families that flourish today had been fortunate enough to back the right horse in every generation. As time went on, perhaps it was no surprise that they developed the misconception that all the emperors over the years had been propped up by their family's hands alone. Ordinarily, they listened when Fang Qin spoke because they respected the Fang family. But when things got heated, as they now did, the Fang family's unspoken hegemony over the noble families wasn't enough to squash dissent. They were all relatives, after all, and no more noble than anyone else. Why should the Fang family have the final word in matters pertaining to the heads sitting atop their necks and the silver filling their coffers? Fang Qin was left to appeal to reason and sentiment. His Majesty has grandiose ambitions and can least tolerate challenges to his imperial power. The far Westerners' new incursion will inevitably remind him of the capital siege. If he had any hesitation before, it will have gone. By now, he has steeled himself to fight this war to the bitter end. Now is not the time to court trouble and risk accusations of bringing disaster upon the nation. Please, my noble companions, put yourself in his place and think. He sighed and softened his voice. If we can endure just a little longer, until the end of the war, the Grand Council will inevitably be reformed or disbanded. We can already guess its members will resist and will certainly make some move. At that point, can His Majesty fail to see how they've overreached? Everyone need only look at the Marching Orders Decree and Gold Consolidation Decree to see what His Majesty truly desires. He is humoring these lowly civilian merchants out of convenience. When they are no longer useful, will His Majesty continue to favor them? After the war, even Guyun will likely be forced to hand over his black iron tiger tally. The Grand Council will never maintain their monopoly on power. Fang Qin believed he'd given an earnest and careful analysis of the situation. But not all of these noble sons were the type to look toward the future. The man who had bragged about his family's iron certificate spoke up again. Minister Fang, you have a host of logical arguments on your side, but you are overly idealistic. After the war is over, when, dare I ask, will that be? A year or two? A decade or more? Are we to swallow our pride until our bodies are buried beneath the yellow dirt? Fang Qin disdained this rabble. Too many of them were leeches on the nation without a single accomplishment to their name. Yet they went about their days with their noses in the air. They deserved to be caught out for their crimes. but he couldn't express his disgust. Pursuit of mutual profit had been the key to bringing these people together, and without the promise of more, no one would listen to him even if he spent every day expounding on the virtues of working for the good of the nation and its people. "Let's calm ourselves," Fang Qing said. "If we were to fight for a decade, the nation would be drained of every drop of blood. Forget our objections. The emperor himself would never agree to it. It won't be that long. The bottom line is, Prince Yan is a prince of the first rank. Nothing short of outright rebellion will bring him down. But the roots of our clans also run deep. As long as His Majesty sits atop the throne, as long as we do not fall into disorder ourselves, who can shake our solid foundations?" Saying it this way was a much prettier way to say it than, "If you don't seek your death, no one will send you to it," though both meant the same thing. It was perfectly constructed to scratch those nobles' itch for flattery. No wonder Fang Qing had made himself the leader of Great Liang's noble families. After decades of holding his own among these people, he was an experienced veteran. Thanks to his efforts, conflict in the court reached a lull. Both sides called a temporary truce, and all their battles retreated under the table. This brief period of peace in Great Liang's domestic affairs lasted several months. 3, to be exact, after which a certain incident put all of Fang Qing's painstaking efforts to waste. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of chapters 18 through 20. I hope you all enjoyed them. I did. I don't really have anything to say. The only thing I want to mention is, as far as Chang'e and dealing with his Wu'erge, and then reading the messages from Guyuan, to me, when he talked about the contents, or when it mentioned the contents of the letters, it sounded worrisome in my mind, at least. But I don't know much about military stuff either. So when Guyun was requesting certain things, my brain was thinking, he was requesting certain things because he's lacking in vision and hearing. I don't know exactly, but kind of like Chang'e, since I don't know nothing about it, I didn't really think too heavy on it. But then also, as soon as Cao Chunhua or Xiao Cao left the tent, I was literally thinking to myself, man, I bet Guyuan sent him away because he doesn't want Cao Chunhua sending Chang'e anything about his health. And lo and behold, I was right. Thank you, Shen Yu, for questioning him. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm going to be doing some things differently for this final volume, just so we can hopefully get through it as quickly as possible, because I'm ready to be done with it. Not like I'm not invested in the story anymore. I am, but I told you guys in my updates video, I don't like reading 2 books at the same time with you guys. So I'm ready to be done with this one so that I can completely focus on the Disabled Tyrant's beloved pet fish. So what I'm going to do is, the way I've been doing this basically, even though Stars of Chaos is taking precedence, is I have scheduled days where I read and then upload between volume 1 of Disabled Tyrant and volume 5 of Stars of Chaos. But what I'm going to do is, even on the days where I'm reading Disabled Tyrant and then setting it up to release the next day, I'm also going to read 1 chapter of Stars of Chaos and upload it the same day as well. So it'll be a fairly short video compared to usual, but you'll be getting Stars of Chaos every day. So even if it's just like 1 chapter this time and then 3 chapters the next time, 1 chapter this time, 3 chapters the next time, that way we can get it over with faster, because my schedule has it slated to end on the 4th of March, and I'd really rather be finished before February ends. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments section about these 3 chapters if you have any, and I'll see you guys next time. Wa Einiman.